18 black girls went missing in the U.S. last week. 11 of them were from Virginia.
A lot of us, and the reason we're talking about warriors and we're talking about good character is because for us, our character has to be centered upon the originator, the creator, the divine, the source, the spirit, whatever name you want to use, but the source from which we all come from. And that's the essence of a warrior having good character, is that connection to the divine. And so that's why we're starting our series, this channel, talking about a warrior's character, because that has to be the foundation. A lot of us have traded our religious dogma, our religious ideology, whether it's Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, we've traded that for now a political ideology, again, being whether it's Pan-Africanism, Afrikan-centeredness, sometimes there's political ideology around Islam as well, even though it's still a religion, but a lot of us have traded it for those kind of things. Again, foundational Black American, ADOS, whatever it happens to be, we traded one ideology for another. And now those ideologies are informing what we believe about the divine, what we believe about God, okay? However, from an African-centered standpoint, that's backwards, right? That's backwards. So we have a saying in African spirituality, as above, so below. But we've reversed that to being as below, so above, which means that as it is on earth, so it is up above. And so we've made whatever our ideology here on earth, we've made that to reflect whatever we believe about the divine. What we want to do on Yobè and on this channel is reverse that. We want to focus on who is the divine, right? And so accessing that for yourself, not believing what Brother Rob says or what anybody else says, but accessing your connection to the divine and having that access channel determine what your ideology is and informing your political system, your political beliefs, and how you move, how you organize, and how you work. Because if you don't do that, if you're just doing things based off what you think is right and the best path, you may have some moderate success, but you're not going to nearly be as successful as if you connect to source from which all things come from. You're not going to be nearly as successful. Your movement won't be as successful unless you connect to the divine. And many of our movements have not had that, and we have not been successful. So it's important that we start with that character, which has to be rooted in our spiritual system. So with that being said, guys, we are reading IWA. This is Baba Baruti's book here, IWA, A Warrior's Character, IWA being the Yoruba term. So please check this out on akabinhouse.com. Again, that's akabinhouse.com. We're going to be starting here on page 10, and we're going to be talking about exactly what is IWA. What do we mean when we say IWA, which is, again, translated as character or good character. So let's go ahead and jump right into it, okay? According to Bolaji Idowu, okay, maybe mispronouncing the name, but he's the author of Odumare, God in the Yoruba Belief. Iwa, pronounced Iwa, is the Yoruba term for character, right? That's what we're talking about. Iwa is what determines the quality of one's life here and beyond. Now, I want to stop right there for a minute and talk about that, okay? Because Baba Baruti here, he says exactly what we're really getting after as far as the core, right? Iwa being defined as a character, right? And specifically good character. And it's that character which determines our life, not just in the present moment, but also in the hereafter. And, in African spirituality, we believe in a hereafter. We believe that, in eternity, this concept of eternity, that there is something beyond what we see here. Now, I want to contrast this with what a lot of us grew up with in terms of a Christian centered, belief system, and specifically a Eurocentric Christian belief system, because a lot of us, have grown up understanding that our hereafter, our afterlife, is based off of what? Belief in a savior, right? Belief in a Messiah. So I want to contrast that. Keep what I just read in mind as far as Iwa being the thing that determines our life in the now and in the hereafter. And we're going to contrast that with the Bible, okay? We're going to contrast that with the Apostle Paul here in the book of Galatians. And I'm doing this on purpose because I want you guys to understand the difference. And a lot of us come from a Christian background, or we're very familiar with this, okay? So I'm going to read here in Galatians chapter 2, because we like to break things down and we're going to get right into the controversy. So let's talk about it. Galatians chapter 2, we're going to dig right into it. Verse 15, it says, actually verse 16. We'll start in verse 16. knowing that a man is not justified by works of the law. Now we're reading the King James Version here, guys, okay? So bear with me. But by faith in Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ that we might be justified by faith of Christ and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. So that's the essence of Christianity, right? Is that whosoever believes, right, in the Son of God shall have eternal life. And that's what Paul is saying here, is that it's not based off of, the works of the law. And if you're familiar with Christianity, you understand this concept of the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, which was based off of obedience to the law, right? The actual physical acts. And the new covenant comes into play now, where it's not really based off what you do physically, but it's based off what you believe, right? What you believe in your heart. Now I've always argued that really that it's kind of, even belief is a work in and of itself. It's something that your brain, your mind, your heart has to do. Things have to activate physically in your brain for you to believe. It's not just some immaterial thing that just happens, right? There is a physical thing that happens in your brain for you to believe, that has to happen for you to believe. However, it's the difference, right? Faith and works. Now, what's different about this as we contrast it with an African-centered spirituality, right, is that what? We're not talking about faith or works. We're not talking about what you believe or what you do. We're talking about who you are, right? We're talking about your character. Okay. Now you will find this same principle throughout the continent. Okay, in many different aspects of African spirituality in various different cultures on the continent of Africa. So if we look back at say Kemetic spirituality historically, we understand that Kemetic spirituality and particularly morality was based upon what? The 42 laws of Ma'at, right? Ma'at. This idea of, truth, justice, reciprocity, order, right? Balance, right? Harmony, all these kind of things. And so the idea in Kemetic spirituality is that Ma'at is embodied by what? And Ma'at is embodied by kind of this female goddess figure with wings and an ostrich feather, right? That feather being the thing that is used to weigh our hearts, which essentially is our character, to weigh our hearts in the afterlife. You hear about this, the scales of Ma'at, right? Is your heart lighter than a feather or heavier than a feather, right? And so we want to, as my sister Neff would say, shout out to hoodie Ma'at, she would always say, travel light, right? And so we want to, in this lifetime, travel very light, right? Not carry a lot of heaviness in our heart, not a lot of anger, a lot of rage, okay, in our heart, but a lot of us do. And we have very much good reason to be upset. We have a good reason to carry, some anger, some rage within us, especially as you see the things that have happened to our community historically and things that continue to happen to us historically. But we need to now transform that rage into something different, into something else, into something a lot lighter that will allow us to actually focus that energy into something productive to actually build our community. And that's what IWA allows us to be able to do, okay? And so I just want to contrast those a little bit so we understand that IWA is not works, is not really what you do, right? From a purely Eurocentric, again, in Eurocentric religion, okay, because it's not really spirituality. In Eurocentric religion, everything is black and white. It's one or the other. It's either faith or it's works. You're either a believer or you're an unbeliever. You're either righteous or you're damned. You know what I mean? Like that's what it is, And so it's very much cut and dry, very much black and white, either or. But in African spirituality, that's not the case, okay? We understand that there's more dynamics to that, and there's not this simple dichotomy and simple way of separating things into these categories. We understand that, but we only understand that as a relation in connection to source. Let's keep reading. All right, it says, to the Yoruba, man's character is of supreme importance, okay? And I ask you, is this of importance to you? Okay? And it is that which Olodumare judges. Now, Olodumare, that's the term that the Yoruba use to describe God, okay? And you can use whatever term you want to use, right? And so I encourage you to do so, right? And so whatever that is for you. Some people use spirit, they use source, they use creator. Typically in African spirituality, the divine is considered the originator. The divine is that which from which everything originates or comes from. And so that is of course source, spirit. Sometimes you might use mother, father, whatever term you want to use. Sometimes in my prayer time, I just say like, whoever you are, and I'll say that sometimes, like whoever you are, because I'm coming from a perspective of, I want you to tell me who you are. I'm not going to assume a particular name, right? I'm not going to use necessarily Lord or God or, some of these terms that have a religious connotation just because of my background. But in that moment, sometimes the divine may be a mother to me. In that moment, sometimes the creator might be a father to me. In that moment, sometimes the creator might be something else to me, right? A friend. The creator can come to you in different forms. It doesn't have to be all one thing, but I ask you and I encourage you to find out for yourself. Every time you speak to your source, your divine, your creator, your spirit, ask that entity to define itself for you and listen for that answer, okay? All right, it says, thus the demands which Olodumare lays upon man are purely ethical, right? There's ethics involved. Man's well-being here on earth depends upon his character. His place in the afterlife, just as we're saying, is determined by Olodumare according to his deserts, what he deserves, right? Olodumare is the searcher of hearts, who sees and knows everything and whose judgment is sure and absolutely inescapable. Again, guys, I don't care what term you use, right? I don't personally use the term Olodumare just because that's just not my background. I don't practice necessarily Yoruba spiritual system, right? I do practice an Afrikan-centered spirituality, but it's based off of my experience with the divine. And that's the difference in African spirituality, guys, is that it's not based upon, somebody else's experience. Like these people over here experienced God and they came over to tell you about it and they put it in a book called the Bible, okay? For us, it's not based off of that. It's based off of our own experience with the divine directly. And so that's what I'm basing my spiritual system off of, is my own interactions. And so I encourage you guys to also do the same thing, but understand that there is morality involved. There is a sense of ethics involved. And this goes back to this concept of, it's not just us creating who we want the divine to be. In my experience, it's not that you choose your belief system, or you choose what you want to believe, or you choose, okay, I'm going to follow traditional African religions, as if it's a choice. Like you can only enter into these things if you're called, right? If these things have to choose you. And so it's not a decision that you make. It's a calling that you answer, and you only answer because you're listening. And so it starts first by listening to these things. Let's keep going here. All right, so it says, therefore, morality is summed up in Yoruba by the word Iwa, which can be translated, right, by the English word character. Iwa, according to the Yoruba, is the stuff which makes life a joy because it is pleasing to God. It is therefore stressed that good character must be the dominant feature of a person's life. Now, I want to stop right there for a second. It says good character must be the dominant feature of a person's life. And so the only way that happens is if you focus on it. The only way that happens is if you set that as an intention. Now, previously we read that Baba Baruti set an intention in writing this book. It was on purpose, very intending, right? An African intent, he says. So good character has to be primary in your life. And I know how important, other things are to you. I know how important, what's happening politically might be to you. I understand what's happening to you in terms of, sovereignty and food security and, health, and wellness. And I get it. All these things are so important, but everything has to be determined and set upon by our character. And that character is, of course, based off of our connection to source. Now, I do want to contrast this again with the Eurocentric ideas around spirituality. A lot of folks have left, right, in terms of the Western world. A lot of folks have left the traditional religions such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, although there are a lot of folks that are still very much ascribed to those ideologies and those religions. But some people have left those things. Now they're into sort of this kind of new age philosophy, right? This whole thing of mindfulness and, which a lot of it's based off of Buddhism and Hinduism, and it's very woo-woo, it's new age, law of attraction, all these kind of things which you may have heard about. Now, and we can contrast that a little bit, because some of you guys may have kind of fallen into these kind of things. And we contrast this a little bit with African-centered spirituality. None of these things are necessarily evil in and of themselves. But the difference in African spirituality is that, we have mindfulness, right? We have these different aspects, right? And ways in which we connect directly to God. The difference is this foundation in morality, this foundation in ethics, which by and large, and not all cases, but by and large doesn't exist in a lot of these modern spiritual movements. Because a lot of these modern spiritual movements are based upon law of attraction, right? Are based upon what's in your heart, what you feel, right? So for example, if you feel and you have a lot of anger and hate in your heart, guess what? You're gonna attract more of that into your life. You're gonna attract more hate, you're gonna attract more negativity. However, if you have love in your heart, you have compassion and all these beautiful qualities, these beautiful feelings in your heart, then you're going to attract more of that and more of the good stuff. The issue with that, however, right, from an African-centered standpoint is that, a lot of the most heinous things in the world are done by people who, quite frankly, have love in their heart. And you're like, how is this possible? Well, go figure. I don't know. You tell me. One of my, a good friend of mine, he put on Facebook recently that there's no hate like Christian love. There's no hate like Christian love. And I thought about that. I was like, man, that's really profound, because some of us have, interacted with people who ascribe to Christianity, and this is not just Christianity, but other spiritual systems or rather religious systems. But they have so much anger within them, and they are very much intolerant. Obviously, the majority of the enslavement of our ancestors, the Ma'afa, the colonialism, all of this was done by Christian nations, by folks who called themselves Christians. This stuff was sanctioned by the predominant Christian church at the time, the Catholic Church. And so what are we to say? That is just what it is. That is just what it is. And you find a lot of people who have this Christian love in their hearts, but they do not, they can still do some of the most horrible things in the world, especially to people of African descent. And so for us, it's not so much about what you believe. It's not so much about what you feel, because when you feel the right things, right, you're going to attract more of that stuff. For us, it's about your character. Who are you? Who are you, truly? And even though you might be African-centered and you might be righteous and you might, have all these ideas about yourself, it's still just an ideology. You have to understand, you have to separate your spirit, your soul, yourself, your true nature from what you believe about yourself. The two are not the same, right? You have to separate those two, and you have to make sure that you are connected to source and have source inform that ideology, and that stay connected to source, so that source can give you clarity when you go off course, when you go off track. Or source, God, the divine, can give you focus and narrow down areas where you may be off base and help you to apply what you believe to a given situation. Bottom line, guys, is that it's not just following a book, but it's staying in constant step with the creator, with your originator, right? And it's up to you to find out who that is for you. Okay, let's keep reading here. In fact, it is the one thing, we're talking about character here, which distinguishes a person from a brute. That's what it says here. And we can dive into that a little bit and contrast that with what's happened to us historically, but being of good character is of utmost importance. Okay, it says IWA is conceptualized in terms of a divine ethicality. Okay, I've never even heard of some of these words, but it says a divine ethicality. It goes back to ethics, right? It goes back to, doing the right thing. But the right thing, I'm not going to jump ahead. Doing the right thing, okay? It says ethicality, a universal spirit-based definition of what is right and wrong, thought and behavior. What Baba Baruti says right here is that it's spirit-based, meaning that it's not based off of what you believe individually about what's right and wrong. Yeah, you have to believe it, but it needs to be based off something else besides just, this is just what I think is right and wrong, and Joe over here may think something different, and then I've got the Bible here that says something else about what's right and wrong, and the Quran says this is right and wrong, and all these kind of things. And so it has to be based off of a higher authority, a higher source. Baba Baruti goes on to say, it is not individually idiosyncratically, decided on an earthly plane. It follows the order of as above, so below. And that's what we're getting at, right? Meaning that it has to start from above. It has to start from that higher source. And so my question for you guys is that the case for you? Okay? Are you consciously thinking about God, the divine? Are you having time with your source? Are you having time with your creator? Meaning that, are you spending time either in prayer or meditation? And when I say prayer, I'm not just talking about one way. And that's the difference again in Afrikan-centered spirituality. We're not just praying one way. We're not just saying, God, give me this, God, give me that, as if he's a genie in a bottle. No, our prayer is communication, meaning it's two-way, it's communication. Communication is not just one way, meaning that we're also actively listening. And it is an exchange between us and our source, our originator, our creator. That is the essence with African spirituality, but that's something you have to do. And that has to be primary in your life. I don't care what you do as far as what your role is in terms of helping your community and being African-centered, you will not be able to sustain it or sustain yourself if you don't connect to source, if you don't connect to God, or whatever term you want to use to describe that higher power, that originator for all of us, the mother and father of us all. And we do believe in that duality, that combination. Creation itself shows us that you cannot have creation without both a male and a female principle. Okay, you can't do it, right? You can't have creation without a male and female principle. You have to have both, male and female. So we understand that the divine has to embody both of those elements, right? Both man and male and female elements. All right. Accordingly, the measure of a woman or man is based on her or his observance of the collection of ideal principles of what is good and right according to the conscience, right? The conscience, what's inside of you, given each of us by the Creator, Olodumare. Again, guys, I don't care what term you use to describe Creator, right? Baba Baruti here used the term Olodumare because he's basing it off of kind of the Yoruba, spiritual systems. But the idea, right, just as it says here, is we have a conscience, right? And that conscience tells us what is right and what is wrong. I remember, a few months ago, and it really stuck to me because if you're on this journey of helping your community and kind of living this kind of life, you find that having character is of utmost importance. And this is why we're doing this, because a few months ago, I wanted to quit. I wanted to stop, right? Because it's tough work. I think this is the hardest work that I've ever really done, is working within our community, because it's easy to go out and start a business. It's easy to go out and sell something. It's easy to go out and teach martial arts. Yeah, Brother Rob teaches martial arts. I have a successful school teaching other forms of martial arts that is doing very, very well, right? But teaching my community is my heart. It's my passion, because this is where I come from. This is who I am. No matter how successful I may be on the outside, this is my origin, right? This is my root. This is the essence of who I am, and this is who I will always be. And so no matter how much you might try to run, in my case, I may try to run from that calling, right? And just because it's hard, and it is hard, and a lot of times we make it hard for each other, as much as I want to try to run from that and have tried to run from that, my conscience, right? The source, my creator, calls me back. And that's why I'm here, because I can't run from that calling. Like, this is who I am. This is who I am at the end of the day. And this is the work that I have to do at the end of my life. I mean, think about it, guys. At the end of your life, what do you want to be known for? Do you want to be known as, Joe was a very successful business person, or think about any celebrity, right? I think about, Floyd Money Mayweather. At the end of his life, right? We can remember him as a great boxer, and he made a lot of money, and he was a great boxer, made a lot of money. I mean, that's gonna be it, right? He probably did some other stuff. He raised his family and kids and stuff like that, but I don't know much about that. And so there's other folks too. What are you going to be remembered for? And I don't want to be remembered as just, he was a great guy, he was nice to people, he was friendly, he had a successful martial arts school, and he did all this other stuff in his life. No, I want to be remembered for the legacy I leave behind that built my community, and that people have something because of me. They can, I want people to know, to have a connection to their creator, their source, the divine, and have an African-centered spirituality that aligns with who they are because of me. I want them to say, because of Brother Rob, I understand who I am. Because of Brother Rob, I have a connection to my creator. Because of Brother Rob, I've been able to learn African martial arts. Because of Brother Rob, I'm able to give back now into my community. And I want my community to continue to give back and continue to grow. And that's the life I want to leave behind in this world. And that's what we're talking about here. Okay, I'm going to go over to page 11 now, just kind of moving over to the next page. See, I got a bunch of stuff highlighted here. Baba Ruti kind of goes into now, he's talking a little bit about our decline, right? Kind of, this is the ideal, this warrior's character, this IWA. But then there's a gap, right, between where we are and that good character. And we have to deal with that gap, because we do have problems in our community. And a lot of the issues in our community, I mean, we don't need handouts to fix. Handouts are great, and we can use handouts. I'm not saying, we don't need any help. I'm just saying that, I don't want to rely on those, right? Because those may not be coming. Yeah, reparations would be great if they ever show up. But I don't want to wait for a freaking, reparations check, which, may or may not happen, okay? Which looks like it's not going to happen, okay? Let's be honest, right? So, what can we do, beyond that and without that? And so we have to be self-determined. We have to save ourselves effectively. But he's talking about the decline now, the decay of where we are, largely as a result of the religious systems that we've been indoctrinated into. We got churches on every corner. And this is the thing I don't get, guys. We're the most religious people in the world. By any statistic, by any measure. Brother Rob is not just making that up. We're the most spiritual, religious people in the world. When the Europeans gave us the Bible, we took that Bible and we say, we're going to do the Bible better than you, right? We do the Bible better than the Europeans, right? Better than those that gave us the Bible. We just do. And we're the most religious. We believe that Bible and that Quran more than anyone else in the world. That's just who we are. But look at the results in our community. What has it produced? And that's my point. And combine that with a public food system, right? The education system that's miseducating us. Anyway, Baba Ruti talks about this, this kind of decline, this moral ethical decline, which we have in our community. Again, I would say as a result of some of the things we've been indoctrinated into. Because we have this idea of faith that's not based off of character, right? It's just based off what we believe and what we feel. It's based off emotion. We're very emotional when we go to church. We can jump, yell, scream, holler, right? Speak in tongues. We can do all that stuff. We're very emotional. We're very good at that. But where's the character that follows? Where's the things that follow to help build our community? So in an attempt to defend our moral and ethical decline, we have even made the mistake of passing that insanity, right? The insanity of this indoctrination that we've been going through, and we're indoctrinating it each generation. Every generation goes to school. It's mandatory, and we're making our kids be indoctrinated into our religious systems, into our churches and things like that. They're being indoctrinated into these things, but they're not learning who they are. They're not learning their own history. They're not learning how to be of good character. They're not learning how to be self-determined, not learning skills like farming and and how to feed themselves. They're not learning these things, how to heal themselves. They're not learning any of this stuff. They're learning how to be dependent upon other people. And that's what the public school system teaches you. And that's what the church has been teaching us. The church has been teaching us to depend upon God and government, okay? Those are the two G's, God and government. Just wait on God, wait on God, wait on God. And then when you die, you get your reward. I mean, that's the message. I mean, that's really the message. And obviously to give your 10% tithe, okay? Don't forget that part. All right, in an attempt to defend our moral and ethical decline, we have made the mistake of passing that insanity on to our children. It has wrenched our minds so far from our ancestors' interpretation of reality, meaning that our minds have so far skewed, from where our ancestors have been, right? Our African ancestors, right? That even those among our children who have chosen, right? They've chosen, in the face of everything working to crush them into a vanquished, pacified oblivion, these children have still chosen to develop a warrior's character, but they're having to virtually start from scratch and building themselves in the image of our ancestors. And that's what we want to talk about a little bit, because we're at a state now where a lot of us are kind of coming into this awareness, this consciousness, whatever you want to call it, right? Where you're kind of realizing what has happened to you historically. You realize that, hey, I've been miseducated. I thought that slavery was over, but no, I realized that my mind has been colonized. I'm mentally, very much Eurocentric in my thinking. I'm very black and white in my thinking. I'm very much ascribed to a way of thinking that does not benefit me or my community or my family, right? Because the way of thinking that I've been indoctrinated into tells me to just go out and get a good job and to, be just do what everyone else does, be a clog in the system. And it doesn't tell me that, hey, you have a rich history, you have a heritage, you have an identity that you have to go back and get. And use that to define yourself and use that to build your community, which is still being torn down. But I'm not just talking about economically, which is being torn down. It's being torn down in our health system because we're dependent upon other people, right? We as a people, as a community, the Black community, by and large, we are dependent upon others to feed us, to heal us, right? Our medicine, to clothe us, everything. We're dependent upon other people to do all these things for us. And that's very little different than slavery, very little different, right? In terms of slavery, slaves are dependent upon their masters, right? To do all these things for them, right? The slaves just do the work, all right? So I want us to get to a point. I'm not comparing our current state to chattel slavery, right? I'm not comparing the two, but I'm saying that, there's something more, okay, than where we are now, because we are still dependent, right? We may not be in chains, we may not be in shackles, we may not be picking cotton, but it doesn't make us free mentally and otherwise, or economically free, okay? And that's what we're talking about. But a lot of us are finding this out at a very late stage in life. And even the children who want to make a difference, they are fighting tooth and nail to be able to do that because there's no systems in place. There's nothing that we've built. And people are building, okay? We are building as a community, but it's not been completed, right? The institutions, the building, the infrastructure, it's not been completed yet. So a lot of our children don't have anywhere to go to be able to fulfill their mission, their purpose, okay? Baba Baruti says this must stop. Having to begin reinstilling a righteous warrior's mentality into each warrior class as they come of age will not sustain an army in perpetual war on all fronts. In fact, it only helps expedite our cultural, social, psychological, and physical genocide. What he's talking about here, guys, is that if we are, because right now, guys, like I mentioned, when you first born, right? Okay, you're a kid, right? What was your childhood like? Okay, I know my childhood was like, I grew up around Christianity. And I grew up going to the public school system, okay? Those are the main institutional influences in my life, okay? As far as institutions that influenced me and who I am today. But, Baba Baruti's point is saying, well, what if those institutions were African-centered, right? What if those institutions that influenced you in the beginning were African-centered? And it raised you to be that person of good character. It raised you to be that warrior, right? Who's building his community, who's able to support himself, support his family and her family, support your community, What if it raised you to build that, to be that kind of individual, to teach, your history, to know your history, first of all, and even be able to teach it, to know your culture, to know your spiritual system, to have a proper connection to source, have a proper connection to spirit, to God, right? Because church hasn't really taught us that. Church has not taught us to have a proper connection to God. It just hasn't. It's teaching us emotion, it's teaching us faith, but we have no connection. Most of us are not able to hear from God. And that's what I mean by having connection to source. Most of us, when we pray, we are believing for what we want, but we're not believing for what the divine is actually telling us, because we're not able to listen. We can't hear, but we haven't been taught to hear. Okay. These are the kind of things that we're talking about. It is an attribution barely discernible. By now, we should have learned, right? We should have learned this, okay? Maintenance and survival. That's the stage that we're at, maintenance and survival, because we're really kind of building things. Most of us are building things later in life to sustain the Black community. And we're late to the game. A lot of us are just coming to this awareness, like after the murder of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement, all of this. A lot of us are like, oh man, crap, things are really bad. Okay, no, things have been bad. Okay, it wasn't, it didn't spill over. Okay, but things have always kind of been in this subtle boiling state. But that's because we've allowed, to some degree, okay, not always, right? Not exclusively. It's not the only reason, but we have not been able to unify as a community. A lot of us believe that we're all different kind of things. We've not have a spiritual system that tells us who we are, that connects us to source. We don't have an education system that teaches us practical, real skills, how to survive, how to feed, clothe, right, heal ourselves. We don't have an education system that teaches us that. It doesn't teach us how to be entrepreneurs. It just teaches us how to go work for somebody else. That's what public school system does. It teaches you how to go work for somebody else, and that's what it's designed for. It's functioning as designed, and so is our churches. So is our spiritual system. Our spiritual system is functioning as designed. It's not meant to liberate us. It's not meant to, help build our community. It's not meant to help unify us as a community. It's helped to keep us where we're at, waiting on heaven. Okay. All right. Okay, so we should have learned that maintenance and survival are no longer adequate terminology to pass on to the next generation. We have to build from the beginning. From birth, all potential warriors must be nurtured and honed to see and feel their genocultural responsibility to carry on this nurturance and honing in the progeny they produce, who will instinctively know and act likewise. This must be built into their character. So a lot of big words there, but what Bob Baruti's talking about here is, guys, is that, just like you were raised, right? You were raised, somebody raised you, I'm assuming somebody raised you, but even as you were raised a certain way, currently very few of us are raised to be African warriors. Very few of us are raised with a consciousness of who we are. It just doesn't happen, on a very much basis. Most of us find this stuff out much later in life. But imagine the work we could do if that happened as youth. The problem we're having, guys, is that no matter how much progress we make as a people, there's always a new generation coming up who's already been indoctrinated into a European-centered ideology, who's already been indoctrinated into the public school system, who's already been indoctrinated into the Western kind of Eurocentric Christianity, who's already been indoctrinated into, the political consciousness of the world. And so we may make a lot of progress in our generation, but if that next generation comes up and they are forced into public schools, they're forced into church, they're forced into, mosque and synagogue and whatever else we're forcing them into, right? Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever clubs, fraternities, sororities, they're forced into all these things, the colleges and other institutions, then that erases the progress that we make. And that's what's happening. So until we start in the cradle, where now we're producing ourselves, we're producing these warriors in the cradle, and that we're able to produce them from the cradle all the way through their higher level education, and then have a path for them to feed and sustain themselves, a career path. And that's what we need that's what a lot of us are building. A lot of us are building that, and that's what we're working towards. But until that's fully installed, until that's fully built, and it's very difficult because a lot of us are building, without a lot of resources. We don't have a lot of money and things like that, very limited resources. But until that's built and installed, every generation that comes along is eroding the progress that's been made because they've been educated incorrectly. They've been miseducated, and they're going to reinforce that miseducation. And so, my encouragement to us as a community is to remove, right, as much as we're able to remove our children from these institutions, right, these public school systems. And a lot of Black families are doing that, right? A lot of Black families are homeschooling now as much as they're able to. They're homeschooling. They're teaching their kids at home. And a lot of people of African descent, Black people, a lot of us are leaving these spaces, these institutions, and we're learning how to sustain ourselves. We're learning how to farm. We're learning how to live off the land. We're learning how to feed ourselves. We're learning how to clothe ourselves, make our own clothes. We're learning how to build our own businesses. We're learning how to technology. We're learning how to use technology. We're doing that now. A lot of us are doing that now, and my encouragement is for us to keep doing that. But we have to get that each generation. We have to get that next generation. We have to have these institutions in place so they can, when kids are coming up, they can be plugged into these institutions so that progress can keep going. Because otherwise, it's going to be erased by the next generation that comes along that's been raised in the public school system and religion and all these other things. They're going to erode all of that and re-educate their generation to what's currently happening. Again, we got churches on every corner. We got schools in every community. But we see what that has resulted in within our communities. All right. So it says here, character is at the spiritual and mortal core of our salvation as a people, right? If it does not exist in us as a righteous power, we do not exist. If it is not good, we do no more than serve others. If we have bad character, all we are is servants to others, which again, I kind of talked previously about slavery. If it is weak, we are weak. However, if it is formed in our traditions, what are your traditions? Designed to follow our way and improve on what has been given us at the beginning of our existence, our salvation as a people becomes no more than another simple task on the way to godliness. And so that's the key, guys, is having this character. That is the root. That has to start there. That's what we have to build. That's what we have to develop. So before we go on and do all these great things and have all these great plans, which all that stuff is very important, and we will talk about that kind of thing as well. But I'm really very much concerned about is who are you and what is your character? What is your character like? Because if you don't develop that strong character, you're not going to survive the battle. You're just not going to make it, okay? And so that's what I want you to focus on is getting to know yourself, okay? Getting to know yourself. A lot of people are not self-aware. They think they're self-aware. They think they have a good idea of who they are. If I ask you, who are you? You'd probably give me some kind of definition about, you do this or you do that. You'll probably tell me what you do. You might tell me what role you play in your life as a husband, father, student, son, daughter, mother, whatever it is roles you play in your life and what you do. But I want to know who you are at your core, who you are at your essence. And that requires that introspection and that contemplation. But I want you to do that on a daily basis. Always ask yourself, who am I in this moment? Because you're always changing. Who you are today is not who you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You're always changing. And so I need you to be in tune with that change, okay? Moment to moment with that change. And that's what it is in terms of developing that character. So that's all we got for this lesson, guys. So definitely go again, aquabithouse.com. Check out Baba Baruti's book, IWA. We're going to be going through this series on a weekly basis, just breaking things down. It's important that we establish and build our character as warriors first before we even start talking punching, kicking, knocking and kicking, all these kind of things, which we will do as well. But I want to make sure we build on the right foundation, and that's going to be our spirituality, our connection to source, again, I'm not trying to tell you who God is. I'm not here to tell you. Religion tells you who God is. Religion tells you what to believe. That's not my role. My role is to tell you to just connect to source and ask source, ask God, ask the originator, your father and mother, who, you know, your divine father and mother, who that entity is. My encouragement to you is to listen and find out for yourself what that spirituality is for you, and to follow that, okay? But you have to do that. I can't make you do it, but you have to do that if you're going to be successful as a warrior on this journey.
The purpose of our organization is to start right here in Harlem, which has the largest concentration of people of African descent that exists anywhere on this earth. There are more Africans here in Harlem than exist in any city on the African continent, because that's what you and I are, Africans.